Inside the cold lecture hall of one of the most prestigious universities in America, amid tangled boards of equations and a storm of heated debates, a man in a navy blue janitor's uniform quietly wiped down each desk, one by one. No one knew his name. No one noticed he was there. Rushed footsteps passed by, confident voices argued over numbers and hypotheses, and he, silent as ever, continued, the sound of his cloth gliding over wood, the only rhythm, steady like the breathing of someone long accustomed to invisibility. Then, in the corner of the room, a group of professors wrestled with an equation that had remained unsolved for 15 years. They argued. They tried everything. And he, the janitor, stopped. He listened. He thought. Then, through the thick air of tension, he spoke. His words froze the room. But moments later came only a faint, dismissive laugh and a cold reply. "You're the janitor. Stay in your lane." A mocking smile. A look of disdain. No one knew that the man they mocked once stood at the very summit of the academic world. And with just 7 lines written on the whiteboard, he was about to shake the entire university to its core. Because sometimes the brightest mind in the room is the one no one bothers to ask. Before we dive deeper into this powerful story, take a few seconds to subscribe, so we can keep bringing you stories that truly deserve to be heard. And when the story ends, don't forget to share your thoughts. Rate it from 0 to 10 in the comments. Every bit of feedback helps us tell even better stories. But tell me, have you ever wondered, what could drive a genius to trade the chalk for a mop? The answer begins on the day he lost everything, 6:14 a.m. The winter wind of Chicago screamed through the streets of Hyde Park, cold enough to feel like it could slice through flesh. The temperature was -8 degrees, but with the wind, it felt like -15. Marcus Washington pulled his worn knit cap lower over his forehead. His breath turned into small clouds of white mist as he pushed open the door to Ryerson Hall, the physics building of the University of Chicago. He had done this job for nearly 10 years, cleaning lecture halls, mopping floors, emptying trash bins, and every morning wiping down whiteboards filled with equations students left behind, like a foreign language. Professors walked past him without a glance. To them, Marcus was simply part of the background, like the old coffee machine in the hallway, always running, always forgotten. But Marcus observed. He always observed. The University of Chicago, one of the most prestigious schools in the country, carried the solemn majesty of Gothic architecture, ivy-covered walls, buildings that looked as though they had stepped out of an art film. People boasted that 92 Nobel laureates were affiliated with the university, a number mentioned in every campus tour, every admissions brochure. Yet, on what seemed like an ordinary morning, amid the scent of stale coffee and the dry scratch of chalk on the board, Marcus heard something that made his heartbeat subtly change. "It doesn't make sense," a man's voice called out from the far corner. "The algorithm fails at the 3rd cycle, even after logarithmic compensation." It was the physics department's table, the group that always sat there, discussing formulas and equations the way others talked about football or politics. "Did you account for the change in entropy growth?" A woman's voice chimed in, sharp and precise like a blade. "I rechecked the data last night. The problem isn't in the method, it's in the structure." Marcus moved a little closer, pretending to collect a few forgotten coffee cups from the table. His eyes stopped at a page covered with mathematical symbols. Those lines, those notations, that language wasn't foreign to him. In fact, it had once been a part of him. Or rather, it was who he used to be. He froze for a moment, gazed distant, and murmured softly to himself, "If the matrix is degenerate, why not invert the vector in Hilbert space?" He didn't realize one of the professors had heard him. The man raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me, what did you just say?" Marcus stiffened. He looked up, then quickly lowered his eyes to the floor. "I was just thinking out loud. Sorry." "Interesting," the professor said, half amused, half mocking. "Looks like we've got a new linear algebra expert on the janitorial staff." Laughter erupted. Not cruel, but enough to make the room feel a few degrees colder. Marcus smiled faintly, bowed his head, and quietly walked away. But inside him, something had just awakened. An old, deep, familiar feeling. Like a small flame that had just been nudged back to life by the wind. The old shower in Marcus's apartment made more noise than water. Rusty pipes buzzed faintly behind the faded bathroom walls. Marcus sat in his small kitchen, the apron still neatly folded across his lap. The ceiling light flickered once, twice, then steadied again. In front of him was a plain wooden table, and on it, only one thing, a worn spiral notebook, its peeling label still showing the words, University of Chicago, Class of 2009. Slowly, he opened it, as if unlocking a part of himself. The pages were covered with handwritten formulas, diagrams, mathematical symbols, neat and precise down to every line. It was the kind of mathematics people didn't just study, but lived with. Back then, this had been Marcus's language, not only to solve problems, but to feel them, to hear the rhythm of a broken pattern, and to know how to bring order back to it. Now, all of it lay silent on those old pages, like a dream that had never been properly closed. Marcus closed his eyes. Autumn 2008. Marcus, then 29, stood before the lecture hall at the Kirsten Physics Teaching Center. More than 200 people filled the seats below. Professors, graduate students, even a few physicists from CERN who had flown in just to hear him speak. Current string theory models face a fundamental issue. Marcus's voice rang out, confident and clear. We always assume the extra dimensions are compactified under a fixed structure. But what if we change the topology? He wrote on the board. Fast, precise, each symbol like a note in a melody. The room fell silent. Then, a wave of applause. His advisor, Professor Richard Steinberg, stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the finest minds of our generation." Marcus smiled, his eyes glowing. And among the hundreds of people in that hall, one woman in blue hospital scrubs clapped louder than anyone else. Angela, his wife. After the presentation, she hugged him tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Marcus. You're going to change the world." Marcus laughed softly, whispering, "We're going to change it, Angela. Both of us." She took his hand and placed it on her belly, 7 months along. "And this little guy, too." Marcus opened his eyes. A tear slid quietly down his cheek. He wiped it away and looked again at the notebook. The last time he'd touched it was in the hospital. Beside an empty bed, Angela was gone just 3 hours earlier. Rush University Medical Center. Bright white lights, the endless beep, beep, beep of a heart monitor. Marcus held a newborn in his arms. Isaiah. His hands trembled. A nurse gently pulled a white sheet over Angela's face. The doctor spoke softly. "Complications from preeclampsia-induced stroke. We did everything we could." Marcus couldn't hear any more. He just looked down at the baby's tiny face, lips pressed tight, eyes still closed. The child didn't know that his mother would never hold him again. "I promise," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. "I promise you and our son, Angela, he'll have a good life. and he'll know how much his father loves him. Isaiah cried over the phone. The babysitter called for the 5th time that day. Marcus sat across from his advisor. "Marcus," said Steinberg, "you're an extraordinary talent. But a PhD demands everything. You can't raise an infant and finish your research at the same time." Marcus looked at the small photo of Isaiah in his wallet. Those eyes, exactly like Angela's. "You're right," Marcus said softly. "I can't." "Then, perhaps—" Steinberg hesitated. "You could take a year off. We can—" "No, Professor." Marcus stood up. "I need to withdraw." "Marcus, you're standing on the threshold of a brilliant career." "And I have a son with no mother," Marcus said, meeting his mentor's eyes. "Angela used to tell me that serving others is never beneath you. Now I have to serve my son. That's my only priority." Marcus walked out of the office. He didn't look back. Life wasn't kind to a single father without a completed degree. Marcus sent applications to research institutes, all rejected. "You've been out too long." The field has changed. He drove Uber at night. Isaiah sleeping in the back seat, clutching a small teddy bear. He worked night shifts as a security guard, watching gates while video calling to help Isaiah with math homework on a cracked phone screen. Finally, he got a janitorial job at the University of Chicago. Stable work. Health insurance for Isaiah. The shift ran from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., enough time to pick his son up after school. For Marcus, that was enough. But every day, as he wiped down whiteboards full of equations, as he listened to professors debate problems he once solved with ease, a small corner of his heart ached. Not from regret, but because the world made him feel that by holding a mop instead of chalk, he had somehow become invisible. Marcus cooked dinner while Isaiah, now 12, sat at the small living room table doing math homework. Their modest apartment in Bronzeville, on the south side, was a place where neighbors still greeted each other each morning like family. From the window, Marcus could hear the train rattle by overhead, a sound that had become the soundtrack of their lives. "Dad!" Isaiah called, eyes still on his notebook. "I can't solve this one." Marcus wiped his hands and came over. "Which method did you try?" "I added both sides, but it still doesn't work." "All right," Marcus said, sitting down, his voice calm and patient. "You don't have to solve the equation. You have to understand it. There's a difference." Isaiah looked up, his eyes brighter now. Marcus guided him step by step, never giving the answer, only helping him find it on his own. When Isaiah finally wrote down the correct result, he cheered. "You're a genius, Dad." Marcus laughed, ruffling his son's hair. "Not me. You're the smart one. I just helped you see it." They had dinner. Deep dish pizza from Lou Malnati's, their weekly favorite. Isaiah talked about school, friends, the Cubs' latest game. Marcus listened, smiling, letting his son's laughter fill the small apartment. But behind that smile, he knew. There was one question the boy had never spoken aloud, yet Marcus saw it in his eyes. "Why do you do that job? Why aren't you a professor like the others? Did you fail, Dad?" Marcus wasn't ready to answer, but he knew, someday, he would have to. The sun slanted through the Gothic stained glass windows, casting long, pale gold beams across the wooden floor. Beautiful, but cold. Most of the students had left, yet the physics professors remained, each one hunched before a laptop, surrounded by towering stacks of books and half-empty coffee cups growing colder by the hour. The air was thick, tired. Marcus quietly wiped a tray someone had forgotten on the table, but his ears stayed alert. 3 days, and not a single step forward, sighed a gray-bearded professor. This equation's been through Princeton, Berkeley, MIT, and no one's found a unified solution. What now? Another man spoke up, frustration lacing his voice. Don't give up. Someone will crack it eventually. But then came another voice, cold, bitter. Or maybe it'll just become another elegant formula, destined to end up in the trash heap of theory. He took off his glasses, rubbing his temples wearily. Marcus stopped. His eyes drifted toward the open notebook on the table, filled with tangled, looping symbols. He recognized it instantly. The structure, the rhythm, the logic. It wasn't foreign. It was something that lived inside him, something that once flowed through his veins like breath itself. Without thinking, Marcus spoke. Pardon me for interrupting, but have you tried inverting the second-order boundary parameters? You might be assuming an error that doesn't actually exist. The room fell utterly silent. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward him at once. One of them, a young professor in a pressed blazer with a university ID clipped neatly to his pocket, looked at Marcus with a mix of surprise and contempt, as though the janitor had just made a toast at a black-tie gala by mistake. I'm sorry, what did you just say? Marcus blinked, his voice lowering. I just thought, maybe the issue lies in the initial vector assumption. If you restructure the boundary cycle, perhaps... A pause. Then the faint sound of a scoff. Ah, the young man said, lips curling as he crossed his arms. Looks like we've got a new hire for the math department. Do you usually solve equations while mopping floors? Soft laughter rippled through the room, not loud, but sharp enough to cut through skin. Marcus nodded slightly, forcing a polite smile. My apologies, sir. He turned away, heading for the counter. But this time, he didn't just walk. His hand clenched the cleaning rag so tightly that his knuckles turned white. What burned in his chest now wasn't shame. It was pride, crushed and humiliated, finally pushing its way back to the surface. Like a flame once extinguished, now quietly flickering back to life in silence. The small apartment. Isaiah was fast asleep, clutching his chess tactics book beside him, his breathing soft and steady. Marcus sat in the kitchen, the dim yellow light forming a faint halo across the table. Before him, the old notebook. He opened it. Those pages were still there, filled with the old dreams. Dreams he thought he had buried. Or rather, dreams he had traded away to gain something far more precious. Service is never beneath you. Angela's voice echoed in his mind, warm and gentle, as if coming from somewhere far away. But tonight felt different. Tonight, Marcus wasn't just remembering the past. He was thinking about the future, about the way those professors had looked at him, as if he didn't deserve to breathe the same air as them, about the smirks, the half-jokes, the words that seemed harmless but pierced straight into his pride. And then, about Isaiah, his bright, kind son, growing up in a world that would judge him by his father's job. A thought rose within Marcus, clear and unwavering, like a bell ringing through the night. I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing this for my son, so he'll know his father was never a failure. Marcus turned to the last page of the notebook, and he began to write, not out of anger, not out of despair, but in a calm, radiant clarity, with love, with faith, with the quiet brilliance of a man once applauded by an entire auditorium. He remembered the equation, not perfectly, but close enough. He had seen it once, hidden in the shadow of another problem. One line, then another. His hand grew steadier, his heart quieter. In that small, forgotten kitchen on the south side, Marcus smiled faintly. It's still here, he whispered. It's always been here. Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay on the old sofa, streetlight filtering through the thin curtains, painting trembling streaks across the wall. The sound of the elevated train drifted in, the familiar heartbeat of Chicago nights. He closed his eyes, but his mind wouldn't rest. Numbers, vectors, multidimensional spaces swirling like points of light. And then it came. A connection, a pattern, a way of seeing the problem that no one else had seen before. Marcus sat up, heart pounding. He flicked on the lamp, grabbed the notebook, and began to write. Fast, urgent, afraid the idea might slip away. If the compactification isn't static, if the topology itself is dynamic, if we apply Calabi-Yau manifolds in this direction, and the entropy correction. 4:30 a.m. Marcus stopped. He stared at the page in front of him. 7 lines. Clear, elegant, perfect, like a melody. The solution. He sat motionless, staring at the still wet ink, his heart thundering in his chest. Then tears spilled down his face. No sound. Just quiet drops blurring the corner of the page. They weren't tears of sorrow. They were release. The deep relief of 10 years buried in silence finally breaking free. "Angela," Marcus whispered, trembling in the dark. "I'm still me. I'm still here." He lowered his head onto the table, still holding the notebook tightly, and cried. Cried until exhaustion took him. Then, as the sound of the train faded into the distance and the last warmth of the candlelight lingered in the air, Marcus drifted into sleep. The notebook remained in his hands, proof that a part of the man he once was had come alive again. The campus was still asleep when Marcus stepped outside. The Chicago sky was a deep shade of navy blue, and the first light of dawn had only begun to brush the tops of the ancient oak trees. The air was biting cold, 5 degrees below zero. Each breath he exhaled turned into small clouds of white mist that dissolved into the stillness. Marcus walked slowly across the empty quad, between rows of stone buildings veiled in frost. No one saw him. No one knew where he was going. He carried no mop, no cart. Only a notebook. He entered the physics building through the side door. The hallway was so silent he could hear the echo of his shoes against the tiled floor. The kind of silence that makes a place feel sacred. Ryerson Hall. Room 214. Marcus knew that room would be empty at this hour. At the front stood a spotless whiteboard. On the shelf, several markers neatly lined up, their tips still new. He opened his notebook, pulled out a blue marker. Standing before the board, Marcus paused for a few seconds. The morning light filtered through the window, touching his face. Calm, steady, composed. Then he raised his hand. No hesitation. Line 1, theoretical framework. Line 2, variable adjustment. Line 3, invert vector within Hilbert space. Line 4, apply dynamic Calabi-Yau topology. Line 5, correct entropy using Rényi method. Line 6, verification. Expected error less than 10 to the power of -8. Line 7, QED 7 lines. Not a single word wasted. No trace of ego. Only the purity, elegance, and profound stillness of a mind reaching its limit. When he finished writing, Marcus stood quietly. He looked at the whiteboard. Not with pride, but with peace. There was nothing left to prove. Nothing left to say. He capped the marker, tucked the notebook under his arm, and quietly opened the door to leave. The morning wind swept through the long hallway, carrying with it the scent of damp wood and old chalk. Outside, the sun was just cresting the clock tower. The first rays of a new day spilled across the silent campus. No one knew that, on that tranquil morning, a man they had never truly seen had just solved what the brightest minds in the world could not. The sound of Professor Jonathan Harris's footsteps echoed through the long hallway as he pushed open the door to room 214. A steaming cup of coffee in hand, his eyes weary. He was bracing himself for yet another unproductive morning. But what he saw made him stop cold. On the whiteboard were 7 lines of equations, elegant, precise, unbelievable. Harris blinked, stepped closer. The cup tilted in his hand, a few drops spilling unnoticed. His voice came out rough, barely a whisper. It can't be. Within minutes, his phone was buzzing nonstop. Then Dr. Kim called. Then Dr. Morales. Then 2 teaching assistants. Soon, 6 people were crammed shoulder to shoulder inside the small room, eyes glued to the whiteboard, voices overlapping through quick, breathless exchanges. This isn't conjecture. This is genius. But none of us wrote it. This could be publishable. One of them pulled out his phone, snapped a photo, and posted it on Twitter. Tweet: The Hartwell Conjecture. Solved. And nobody knows by who. $, physics. $, string theory. $, mystery. Within minutes, the tweet exploded. Tens of thousands of retweets, hundreds of comments. Speculations flooded in. Visiting scholar? Anonymous student? AI generated? A prank? Back on campus, tension rose. Who had entered room 214 that morning? Campus security pulled the hallway footage, scrubbing through the quiet, still frames of dawn. And then, there he was. A small man in a white uniform, wearing an old knit cap, holding a notebook. Walking slowly, calmly. Marcus Washington. The department conference room fell into absolute silence. You've got to be kidding, Harris muttered. That's the janitor, Morales whispered. This can't be real. But the footage didn't lie. The image was clear as daylight. The man they passed every morning, the one who poured their coffee, who cleaned their tables, had just surpassed them all. That afternoon, the name Marcus Washington was no longer a whisper. It became a wave, rolling through every hallway, every group chat, every internal email thread on campus. Who is Marcus Washington? Students began leaving small notes on the cafeteria counter. Are you the one who solved it? Teach us. Is it true? Marcus kept his head down, continuing his work. But now, eyes followed him everywhere. Curiosity, admiration, and a trace of guilt. Professor Harris couldn't stop thinking. He dove into old academic archives, typing the name Marcus Washington. And there it was. Marcus Elijah Washington, University of Chicago, class of 2009, graduated summa cum laude, mathematical prodigy, featured in scientific journals, invited speaker at international conferences. Then, gone. After that year, no record, no trace, as if he had vanished from the academic world like a ghost. In the cafeteria, a group of students crowded around a phone. On the screen, an old magazine cover. A young face, eyes bright, headline bold. The next Einstein? Marcus Washington redefines theoretical physics. One student whispered, eyes wide, "That's him. That's really him. He used to be a genius, and they made him disappear." Another shook their head. Or maybe he disappeared himself. But why? That question began to spread, not just among students, but across social media, in news articles, on morning radio shows. The university could no longer stay silent. Dr. Morales proposed a private meeting. Marcus declined, then declined again, and on the third request, he finally agreed. But with one condition: no cameras, no press, no questions about the equation. Just listen. They agreed. And what Marcus said in that small room that day changed everything. The small room was still. The scent of old coffee mingled with the faint tang of new paint. Afternoon light streamed through the blinds, laying a golden stripe across the table. Marcus sat across from Professor Harris, Dr. Morales, and Professor Elizabeth Hartwell, 58, silver-haired, poised, heir to one of Chicago's oldest academic families. On the table lay his spiral notebook, silent, sealed like a memory. Marcus didn't fidget. He didn't avoid their eyes. He simply looked at them, calm, steady, clear-eyed. "You want to know who I am," he said evenly, "so I'll tell you. But don't expect a dramatic tragedy. Sometimes pain doesn't scream. It just waits." No one spoke. The air seemed to harden. "My name is Marcus Elijah Washington. I graduated from the University of Chicago in 2009, top of my class. Published at 23. Invited to conferences. They called me the future of theoretical mathematics." He paused. His voice stayed low and steady, though something caught in his throat. That same year, my wife, Angela, was diagnosed with preeclampsia in her 8th month. She was a nurse at Rush University Medical Center, a quiet shift in the room. Dr. Morales inhaled softly, eyes downcast. My father died young. I was the only one left, and I had to choose equations or family. In my world, family wins. The words silenced the room. The university tried to keep me, offered grants, extensions, but illness doesn't wait for convenience. Preeclampsia eats time. It steals every breath. Marcus's voice trembled slightly. I stayed beside Angela for 3 months, watched her fight for every heartbeat, every step. And then, the day she gave birth, he stopped. His gaze fell to the table. His voice grew small. She had a stroke. The doctors did everything they could. A long breath. Angela died on the operating table. Isaiah, my son, survived. And I sat in that hospital room, holding a newborn, knowing I was all he had left. No one moved. Only the soft tick of the clock filled the space. When I came back to campus, I couldn't focus. How could I solve equations when my child was crying at a daycare 20 miles away? How could I write a dissertation when he needed me for every meal, every nightmare? He lifted his eyes, meeting theirs. So I walked away. Not from mathematics, but from academia. I had to silence again, heavy and deep. Time passed. The academic world moved on. My name disappeared. I tried to return, applied, emailed, reached out. They said, "You've been gone too long. The field has changed." Marcus smiled faintly, a mix of bitterness and pride. So I did what I had to do. Uber, night security, then this job, stable, health insurance for my son, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., so I can pick him up from school. Professor Hartwell swallowed hard, eyes glistening. Marcus went on, voice quiet but firm. I don't regret choosing family. But I do regret letting this world make me believe that I didn't deserve respect simply because I held a mop instead of a piece of chalk. The words landed like a blade. No one dared look at him. I didn't leave mathematics, Marcus said slowly. Mathematics never left me. I just had to walk away. For love, Professor Hartwell, whose late father's name was attached to the very conjecture Marcus had solved, wept silently. Dr. Morales bowed her head, hiding her trembling lip. Even Professor Harris, usually the hardest voice in the room, had nothing to say. And in that small office, for the first time, the proudest minds of the university finally saw Marcus Washington. Not as a janitor, not as a mystery, but as a man who had sacrificed everything for something far greater than glory. Outside the door, Dr. Brendan Callahan stood frozen, notebook clutched tightly in his hand, heart heavy. He hadn't heard every word, But he knew what had been said. Brendan, too, was from the South Side. His father had been a welder. He'd grown up poor, earned scholarships with sweat and grit, climbed every rung to become a professor. And all along that climb, he'd tried to disown where he came from, to erase his own roots. Seeing Marcus today, a man doing the very job his father once did, but with a mind that outshone them all, was like facing the reflection he'd spent his life avoiding. Standing there in the hallway, Brendan felt something break inside him. Shame, regret, and the crushing realization he had spent his entire life proving he wasn't that kid from the South Side, only to become exactly the kind of man he once despised. 7:03 a.m. Marcus walked into the cafeteria, just like every other morning. The same white apron, the same old knit cap, the same slow, steady steps. But today, something was different. The room was silent. No clatter of trays, no laughter, no hum of the coffee machine, only hundreds of eyes watching him. Then, one by one, they stood. Students, staff, professors, and then applause. At first, soft, then stronger, then swelling, like waves crashing through the room. Not polite, not forced, but real, from the heart. Marcus froze in the middle of the aisle. The sound seemed to rush through him, carrying with it all the years he had been invisible. Faces that once looked past him were now filled with respect. Eyes that once avoided him now held remorse and gratitude. A young woman stepped forward, a sophomore with brown skin, long braids, and bright, trembling eyes. Her voice was soft, but the whole cafeteria heard it. "Mr. Marcus, today you don't have to serve anyone. Today, we're here to serve you. Thank you." Marcus smiled, a small, simple smile, shining through tears. Tears of a man who was finally seen. That afternoon, the president of the University of Chicago appeared at an unscheduled press conference. Behind him, the university flag. In front, rows of journalists. His voice was low, resonant, and emotional. The University of Chicago is proud to announce the establishment of the Washington Fellowship for Hidden Excellence, a scholarship dedicated to non-traditional students, to single fathers and mothers, to those who had to pause their education to care for loved ones, yet still carry the fire of knowledge within them. The entire hall rose in applause. And then, news that stunned everyone. Marcus Washington would be invited to deliver a guest lecture in the main auditorium. The first time, he refused. The second time, he refused again. But the third time, Marcus nodded. With one condition: "I won't speak about the formula. You already have enough people for that. I'll speak about what no one teaches, how to listen to the people you've overlooked." And the university agreed, without hesitation. The grand auditorium was packed. Students filled every row. Faculty members stood along the walls. Even the security guards, baristas, and janitorial staff, many for the first time in their lives, sat on the plush red seats of this prestigious hall. The lights dimmed, and in the gentle half-light, Marcus Washington stepped onto the stage. No spotlight, no music. Just a man in a dark blue shirt, holding an old notebook close to his chest, as though it carried part of his heart. He walked to the podium. For a long moment, he simply stood there, looking out at the crowd. In the front row sat Isaiah, wearing a crisp white shirt, a small bouquet of flowers in his hands. He looked at his father with quiet pride. "Good afternoon," Marcus began, his voice deep and warm. "My name is Marcus Elijah Washington. I've served coffee to many of you, cleaned your tables, watched you laugh, and overlook me." A faint rustle swept through the hall. But his tone carried no bitterness. It was calm, clear, each word polished by forgiveness. For a long time, I thought my story had ended. That mathematics was something I had left behind. But the truth is, it never left me. Marcus placed his hand over his heart. It's still alive. Right here, he opened the notebook and turned to the last page. Light glinted across the faded ink. When you laughed at me, when you told me to stay in my place, that wasn't the first time. And surely, it won't be the last time someone underestimates a black man. The words struck like thunder in the stillness. No one moved, but in his voice there was no anger, only truth. Cold, undeniable, human truth. What you fail to understand is this. Brilliance doesn't wear a uniform. It doesn't come with a title. It isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the person you never thought to ask. Marcus gently closed the notebook. The soft click echoed in the silence. Those 7 lines on the board, they weren't just numbers. They were about respect. They were what happens when someone invisible finally dares to speak. He paused. The entire hall held its breath. I'm not here to be a symbol or a saint. I'm here to remind you, knowledge without humility is just ego. His gaze swept across the hall, voice firm and resonant. You see me now? But ask yourselves, how many other Marcuses do you pass by every day? No one told them to stand, but the entire auditorium rose as one. Applause thundered. Some cried. Others bowed their heads in silence. And in that moment, the great university didn't just hear Marcus Washington. They felt him. Isaiah ran onto the stage and threw his arms around his father. Tears streamed down the boy's cheeks. Dad, I'm proud of you. Marcus hugged his son tightly, whispering through the lump in his throat, and I'm proud of you, Isaiah. Always. The stage lights dimmed softly, leaving only the two of them, father and son, embracing amid the roaring applause. A simple image, yet powerful enough to silence an entire hall with reverence. 2 days later, the small office where Marcus now worked as a consultant was quiet. A knock, 3 times. Marcus opened the door. Standing there was Dr. Brendan Callahan, the man who had mocked him twice. They faced each other, 2 men from the same world who had chosen different paths. Brendan hesitated, voice trembling. I came to apologize. I didn't know. I truly didn't know. Marcus shook his head gently, his tone calm. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. Brendan looked down, swallowing hard. I'm from the South Side, too. My father was a welder. I spent my whole life trying to prove I wasn't like him, that I was better. He lifted his eyes, wet with shame. But when I saw you, I saw everything I'd tried to forget, and I hated you for it. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you were the mirror I was afraid to face. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded, voice soft, but unwavering. What you need to learn isn't mathematics. It's how to see people. And you're lucky, because you still have time to learn. Brendan's throat tightened. He nodded. They shook hands. It wasn't full forgiveness, but it was the beginning of something new. The cafeteria looked different now. The walls had been repainted a brighter shade. New green plants filled the corners. Framed photos lined the walls, staff, students, and shared memories. They hung beside plaques and academic awards, as if to say, every contribution, no matter how small, deserves to be seen. At the center hung one portrait, Marcus, young, holding an MIT medal. Below it, a gold inscription read, Knowledge is knowing. Wisdom is listening. Marcus E. Washington. Marcus walked through the familiar space with quiet grace and the calm confidence of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. Not hurried, not blending in, yet everyone noticed him. His badge now read, Visiting Professor, Theoretical Physics. But he still wore his white cafeteria uniform. By choice. It's comfortable, he told people with a smile. And it reminds me where I come from. A freshman approached, clutching a notebook nervously. A young black girl with tight curls, glasses, and a trembling voice. Professor Marcus, I watched your speech. I've been working on a theory, but I'm not sure it makes any sense. Marcus smiled gently and opened her notebook. The pages were messy with equations and half-formed ideas. He nodded, then pointed to the top of the first page, where she'd written, Page 1. Do you see this? He asked. This is the most important number. 1. She blinked, confused. Yes, sir? Marcus chuckled softly. It's the first step. The first time you dared to write. The rest will come after. The girl exhaled, her shoulders relaxing. Marcus closed the notebook and added quietly, Sometimes you just need to wipe the table clean, to see the problem from another angle. They both smiled, and life went on, quietly, simply, beautifully. The small South Side apartment was the same. The old walls, the rumble of the train outside the window, but it felt warmer now. Not because of fresh paint, but because something inside had changed. Marcus and Isaiah sat at the little table. Between them, an open box of Lou Malnati's pizza. The Cubs game played softly on TV. Isaiah looked at his father, hesitant, thoughtful. Dad, my friends keep asking me, why you didn't work at the university before? Why you had to do that job. Marcus set his slice down. He'd known this moment would come. Do you remember what I told you about chess? He asked. Sometimes you have to sacrifice a piece to win the game. Isaiah nodded. Life's the same, Marcus said. When your mother died, I had to choose. Keep my career, the recognition, the equations, the awards, or stay home to raise you. He met his son's eyes. I chose you. And if I had to choose again, I'd still choose you. Every day. Every time Isaiah looked down, voice small. But did you ever feel like you failed? Marcus smiled, softly, deeply. No, son. I didn't fail. I chose. And that's the difference. He placed a hand on Isaiah's shoulder. Failure is when you give everything and fall short. Sacrifice is when you give up something for someone who matters more. I didn't fail, Isaiah. I sacrificed. And that made me stronger, not weaker. Tears welled in Isaiah's eyes. I'm sorry, Dad. I used to think maybe you weren't good enough. Marcus pulled him close, holding him tight. No, son. I did the hardest thing a person can do. Give up what I wanted to protect what someone else needed. That's not weakness. That's love. They sat quietly, arms around each other. Outside, the train rumbled by again, the familiar song of their shared life. Dad? Yeah? I'm proud to be your son. Marcus closed his eyes. A smile spread across his face. A single tear slipped down his cheek. And I'm proud to be your father, Isaiah. Always. The next morning, Marcus was making coffee when Rosa Delgado, the cafeteria manager, walked in. A Mexican woman with kind eyes and a voice like a lullaby. Mijo, she said, eyes misty. I watched your speech. I cried like a baby. Marcus smiled. Thank you, Rosa. For everything, she shook her head. No, Marcus. Thank you. You said what we, the forgotten ones, never had the courage to say. That our work matters. She paused, tears glimmering as she smiled. Do you remember Miguel? My son? The one you helped with his college essay? Marcus nodded. Of course I do. Last week, he got into the University of Illinois. Full scholarship, Marcus's eyes lit up. Rosa, that's incredible. Because of you, she said. You showed him. Where you start doesn't decide where you end. They hugged. Two people once considered invisible. Now, both finally seen. 2 weeks later. Marcus stood before the blackboard in room 214, the same room where he had once written the 7 lines that shook the university. 30 students sat in silence, some curious, some skeptical, some in awe. Marcus smiled. Good morning, I'm Marcus Washington. Before we begin with string theory, I want to tell you something. He wrote on the board, Mathematics isn't intelligence. It's perseverance. He turned back to them. Do you know the difference between a genius and an ordinary person? A few heads shook. A genius quits after the 99th attempt. The ordinary person tries the 100th. Marcus smiled. I'm not here to teach you how to be smart. You already are. I'm here to teach you not to give up. Because failure isn't when you can't solve the equation. Failure is when you're too afraid to even try. A student raised her hand timidly. But, Professor, you gave up once. You left your PhD program, didn't you? Marcus nodded, without flinching. Yes, I did. But not because I couldn't. Because I chose something more important. His tone softened. Life will force you to choose between career and family, ambition and compassion, being right and being kind. And sometimes the right choice isn't the easy one. The room was silent. No pens, no whispers, only listening. Today, before we talk about Calabi-Yau spaces or supersymmetry, he said, remember this. Mathematics can explain the universe, but it can't teach you how to be human. That's a lesson you'll have to learn on your own. Marcus smiled and set the chalk down. Now, open your notebooks. We've got a lot of work to do, and the class began. No applause, no cheers, just the sound of pencils moving, paper rustling, and a new chapter being written. In the weeks and months following Marcus's speech, something quiet began to change at the University of Chicago. It was no longer curiosity, no longer headlines, it was culture. Students began greeting the janitors by name. Good morning, Ms. Patterson. Have a good day, Mr. Rodriguez. Small words, perhaps, but they carried the weight of respect. People who once passed each other without a glance now smiled, nodded, and met one another's eyes, as equals. One morning, the university president announced a new initiative, the Pathway Program, free courses for all university staff to help them finish degrees or learn new skills. Rosa Delgado, the cafeteria manager, was the first to sign up. At 54, she decided to face the thing she'd feared her entire life, learning to read and write English fluently. James O'Brien, the 62-year-old night guard, enrolled in a history class. In a small interview, he said, I always wanted to learn, but I thought it was too late. Marcus showed me it's never too late. In the sociology lecture hall, Professor Elizabeth Hartwell, who had once sat in the room where Marcus told his story, stood before her students, her hands trembling slightly. That day, she did something she had never done before. She told her own story. My father, the man for whom the Hartwell equation is named, was a brilliant man, she began, but he was also a man who never recognized his own privilege. She paused, voice tightening. I grew up in a home where service was invisible. The housekeeper, the gardener, the driver, they were all ghosts. And I carried that blindness with me for years. Silence filled the room. Until Marcus Washington made me see, every unseen person has a story, a sacrifice, a dignity. She looked at her students, eyes glistening. So today, I want to ask you, who do you see? And more importantly, who do you not see? No one spoke, but every student sat still, deep in thought. Marcus's story was no longer just the University of Chicago's story. It spread across America. The Chronicle of Higher Education ran a feature, "The Janitor Who Solved the Equation, PhDs Couldn't," a wake-up call for academia. NPR invited Marcus for a morning radio segment. He declined at first, then agreed, on one condition: Isaiah would join him. Inside the studio, the host asked, "Do you have any advice for people in situations like yours?" Marcus was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, slowly, firmly. "Don't let anyone tell you you're unimportant because of what you do. Your worth isn't measured by your title or your paycheck. It's measured by how you treat people and how true you are to yourself." He turned toward Isaiah beside him. "And if one day you have to give up your dream for someone you love, that's not failure. That's love. And that's the kind of success no equation can measure." The studio went silent. No music, no applause. Just faces illuminated by quiet emotion. That May, the first Washington Fellowship was awarded. The recipient was Maria Gonzalez, 38, a single mother of 3, working 3 jobs, taking night classes at a community college. At a small but dignified ceremony, Maria stood before the audience, tears streaming down her face, but her voice steady. "I used to think education wasn't for people like me, that I started too late, that I wasn't smart enough." She paused, looking toward the front row, where Marcus sat. "But Marcus showed me, it's never too late. And wisdom isn't about how much you know. It's about never stopping your desire to learn." The hall rose to its feet in applause. Marcus rose too, clapping with them, not for himself, but for Maria, and for the thousands of others still fighting in the shadows, to be seen, to be heard, and to be believed. 6 months after the speech, Marcus was now a paid visiting professor. But every Friday, he still wore his white janitor's uniform, working side by side with the cleaning crew, wiping tables, taking out trash, brewing coffee like before. A student once asked him, "Professor, why do you still do that, now that you're a professor?" Marcus simply smiled. "Because it reminds me where I came from, and because no one deserves to be looked down upon for the work they do." Isaiah, now 13, sat in the living room, hunched over a geometry workbook. Tomorrow was his advanced geometry exam. "Dad, I'm scared," he whispered. "What if I don't do well?" Marcus pulled up a chair beside him. "Do you know what the worst thing that could happen is? I fail the test?" "Exactly. And then what?" Isaiah stayed quiet. Marcus smiled gently. "Life goes on, son. A test doesn't define you. A grade doesn't define you. What defines you is how you rise after you fall." He brushed his son's hair softly. "I've failed at a lot of things in life, but I've never failed at being your father. And that's the only thing that truly matters." Isaiah's shoulders eased. "Thanks, Dad." "Always, son." On a warm spring afternoon, Marcus and Isaiah walked beneath a canopy of cherry blossoms. The campus shimmered under the soft gold light. A young man sweeping the walkway looked up. "Professor Washington," he called. Marcus stopped, then smiled in recognition. "Miguel, Rosa's son, right?" "Yes, sir." Miguel grinned brightly. "I'm studying at the University of Illinois. Working here for the summer to save up. I'm majoring in engineering. I'll be back in the fall." Marcus shook his hand, pride in his eyes. "I'm proud of you, Miguel." Miguel's voice trembled. "You saved me, sir. You showed me this job wasn't the end. It was the beginning." Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. I didn't save you, Miguel. You saved yourself. I just reminded you that you're worth saving. They embraced, and beside them, Isaiah watched and understood. This was his father's true legacy, not the equation, the humanity. That night, the two climbed onto the roof of their apartment, their quiet place. Chicago's sky was rarely clear, but tonight a few stars pierced through the clouds. Dad, Isaiah asked, how far away are those stars? Millions of light years, Marcus said. Some of them died long ago, but their light is still reaching us. Isaiah frowned thoughtfully. So, we're looking at the past? In a way, yes. Isn't that sad? Marcus shook his head, eyes fixed on the heavens. No, son. It's beautiful. Because even when the stars are gone, their light keeps traveling. It still touches us. He turned toward Isaiah, voice tender. Your mom is like that too. She's gone. But her light, her love, it's still here. In you. In everything we do, Isaiah leaned against his father's shoulder. I miss her. Me too. Every day they sat in silence, beneath the slow heartbeat of the city. Above them, a handful of stars still shimmered. Two survivors finding their own light in the dark. A year after that fateful morning, Marcus returned to room 214. This time, not with a mop, but with a textbook and a blue marker. In the corner of the whiteboard, the faint trace of an old message still remained. No one had dared to erase it. For Isaiah. Never stop believing, Marcus smiled and lifted the pen. Good morning, he said, his voice calm and deep. Today we'll talk about string theory. But before we begin, I want to tell you a story. He wrote on the board, everyone has an equation to solve. The question isn't whether you're smart enough to solve it, but whether you're brave enough to try. He turned to the class, eyes bright and steady. Sometimes the solution isn't in the textbook. It's in your heart. Every day, millions of people do jobs society overlooks. They clean our offices, serve our food, guard our buildings. Each of them has a story, a sacrifice, a dream. Next time you see a janitor, a security guard, a cafeteria worker, remember, they might once have been greater than you. They might be sacrificing for something far bigger. And they deserve respect, not because they solved an equation, but because they are human. Remember to see them. If you believe in stories that inspire, challenge, and give voice to those often forgotten, hit subscribe below. Many more powerful journeys are on the way, and we'd love to have you with us. Leave a rating from 0 to 10 in the comments, and tell us, who is the invisible person in your life you want to thank? Thank you for listening to this story. And remember, greatness doesn't wear a uniform, and sacrifice deserves to be honored just as much as any achievement.